Welcome to the latest episode of our unique NUFC podcast. And after a smash and grab in Sherwood Forest, it's time for an international break for Eddie's Mags. Not for us, though, as we turn our hands to a bit of culture and feature a director winning deserved acclaim for a new political drama that explores a time of significant change in the identity of the Northeast communities, 1996, a time which was firmly etched in all of the Toons' memories. Welcome to Black and White with Arab News.
When you do that with footballers, like he said about Leeds, and when you do things like that about a man like Stuart Pearce, I've kept really quiet, but I'll tell you something. He went down in my estimation when he said that. We have not resorted to that, but I'll tell you, you can tell him now, if you're watching it, we're still fighting for this title, and he's got to go to Middlesbrough and get something. And I'll tell you, honestly, I will love it if we beat them. Love it.
Okay, before we get to today's guest, it's a warm welcome back to Ali Khaled. Ali, a last-minute winner, as always, welcome for the Toon.
Yeah, great result for Newcastle. That's 2 wins on the bounce. Remember, we were talking after the City game, or even before the City match, we were saying, that's probably not going to be the game we're going to judge them on any sort of comeback. And of course, they lost to Manchester City. But since then, 2 excellent wins, I think, and especially this one, the last-minute winner from Isaac, who we've been calling for to start and has been
Did you get that score right?
I did. Got a spot
back on track.
Back on track. Both me and the team. I think 2 great results and really puts Newcastle back. I think you could look at the table now and think they're in the best position for that 4th place. Still early days as well in terms of like the run-in, but Liverpool and Tottenham not playing too well or being inconsistent, shall we say? And Newcastle with those 2 wins look like they're the best out of the 3 at the moment.
At the moment, it's a watch this space. Something else that's a watch this space is football, politics, and the labour of love. And set against the backdrop of the infamous Premier League season when Newcastle United almost won under the management of Kevin Keegan. Today's guest is director of Love It If We Beat Them, Bex Bowsher. Absolutely great to have you on, Bex. How are you?
Brilliant. It's brilliant to be here. I'm great. How are you?
Very, very good. We're so excited to be excited about this all week because obviously it contains things that we love and against the backdrop of football, which we're going to get into. But because we've got such a wide audience, as well as just our Geordie contingency who'll know all about it, just give us a brief synopsis of what the show is and your involvement.
Yeah, so Love It If We Beat Them is about a bloke called Len who's in his mid-50s. He was a miner, kind of sat on the picket lines in the 80s. And then obviously as the mines shut down, he lost his job. And he basically became really politically engaged kind of off the back of that and is sort of working for the council. The play kind of opens when he discovers that the local MP has just died. And he decides it's his time to contend for that seat. However, what he wasn't reckoning with was that New Labour, who were on the rise at that time, had their own ideas about the person who should fill that seat. And so with the backdrop of kind of his football fanaticism and the rise and fall of NUFC in that year, we also track the rise and fall of Len's attempt to get into the big game of politics.
Phenomenal. I mean, it's a very clever, very clever setup. Ali, it's a year that many of us football fans remember because many football fans took to Newcastle being their second favourite team when they went head-to-head with Manchester United. And of course, it brought up many infamous footballing moments as well to the backdrop of Bex's production, including the 4-3 against your beloved Liverpool and, of course, that famous Keegan rant.
Yeah, I mean, that season, 95-96, there's a really good case for it being the best Premier League season ever. I think it was... obviously Manchester United won in the end, but like Newcastle really were the story of the season. Keegan and Newcastle were the story of the season. Everybody knows about like the 12-point lead and the 4-3 against Liverpool, the 2-1 against Blackburn, and of course I'd love it if we beat them. Keegan, rant, which obviously gives its name to the play. I love that. I love that season, and I know that in the end it was Liverpool, it was Manchester United and Newcastle United going for it, but Liverpool had a really good team that year as well. So personally, I have a very fond memories of it. Not just the 4-3. Liverpool had Robbie Fowler and Steve McManaman, Stan Collymore all playing really well. So that was like almost third great team in that title chase. But obviously, the story of the season was Newcastle, and then at the end, United's comeback, Cantona scoring like, I don't know, countless, single goals and 1-0 victories from Manchester United. But yeah, for me, still the best Premier League season ever. So fantastic backdrop, to the story, as Bex said. And for people who lived in the UK, I'd lived in the UK before and after. I wasn't there at the time, but obviously a very special time as well, like in terms of culture and music and what was going on in the country.
Absolutely. And of course, that season, Ali, as I did previously, many before moving to the Middle East, I was at every game that season, home and away. I can literally painfully remember every minute of that season. Okay, Bex, let's take a little bit of a wander down memory lane and looking at your background. Is it any real surprise that this is your game, given that your mum, drama teacher, and your grandparents ran community panto? You were destined for this, weren't you?
Basically, yeah. I mean, I first appeared on stage as a bunny rabbit when I was about 4, and saved the princess from the evil wizard by chewing through her ropes. Yeah, I think I had a great childhood where I probably skipped school more than I should so that I could go sit at work with my mum and basically take notes on what her students were doing and tell them what to do.
Did you find straight off the fascination for it then?
I think I love storytelling is what it comes down to for me. And so I love the challenge of finding a great story and finding the best way to tell that story. And if I can link it to things I love, like politics and who we are as a society. And I'm not a Northeast native. I'm from Yorkshire.
Yep.
But I feel very much like I've adopted here as my home. So stories that are really Northeastern are one of my loves.
And no doubt you'll have found that you've been adopted by the area as well, because Geordies have a presence of doing that. Absolutely.
And I have 2 Geordie sons, so.
Oh, do you? There you go. There's the link straight off. Brilliant. Ali, listen, football, it's a cultural pathway in most lives. So just going back to the backdrop of this whole story, it's a very important backdrop that's being portrayed. It's everyday life, isn't it? But isn't it great how we can involve football through productions such as this nowadays?
No, absolutely. I mean, we've touched on this in the past, and obviously it's very relevant with today's guest. Is how football plays a backdrop to our lives. In the same way, I think that music and productions and film as well. We use them as like bookmarks in our lives. We remember certain periods. In Beck's case, the politics of the region at the time. For us, it's football, but like football's always there. And if you're from a place like Newcastle where football is such a big part of it, it goes hand in hand. I think with what's going on with the politics of the time or the culture of the time. For us, whenever we talk about like when I met you like 20 years ago, Pete, or when you were in school or when I was in school, we'll always remember those years by what was happening with the team. We'll always say like, there was like, won this title or whatever, So it's, and of course, we're biased. Football is pretty much everything in our lives. So having it as a backdrop to a story, it always really sort of fixes it in a moment in time, which we remember so well.
Was it a no-brainer, Bex, to involve something as intrinsical in the region as football into the story? I'm just fascinated to know, because there are aspects in there. Obviously, the political aspect comes through very strongly, because that's something that comes out in what you do in your writing and in your productions. But was it sort of looking at the area and thinking what makes the area tick, and then building a story around those, or was it a case of looking at that time in the Northeast? It was just something that happened to be a bigger scale than ever football with the fact that Newcastle were challenging for a title.
Yeah, so Rob Ward, the writer, has a particular interest. He's a massive Everton fan, unfortunately.
Poor Ali.
And, he, in 2019, when there was that kind of big shift in terms of the red wall in the northeast, and Rob was really interested both in that political shift, but also with kind of the takeover at Newcastle.
Right.
It was there's a similar vibe in the city. Suddenly you've got this football club that's got all of this money in it and can actually afford decent players for the first time in however many years. And you've also got kind of a Labour Party who is shifting rapidly and seems to be very different from what came before. And so he really wanted to look at how those two things, when you put them in the boiling pot that is Newcastle, what kind of comes out, basically.
It's fascinating. And again, someone who I've had on the show and been lucky enough to deal with, speaking of politicians who love Newcastle, is Chi Onwurah, who does a lot for our city as well, black and white through and through, huge Newcastle fan. Ali, speaking of our beloved Newcastle United, they're currently on a warm weather trip here in Dubai. Although not a training camp, I've been told, my sources tell me, more of a team bonding exercise. So I put it to you as a football genius. What's the thoughts on Eddie's thoughts on this type of getaway? What does it instill in the team if it's not a training camp?
I think with Newcastle under Eddie Howe, just a couple of months after he took over, they had that first warm weather break in Saudi Arabia. And it was a bit of a turning point for the club. You know, they'd beaten Leeds in that famous game just before they came here. But it served him well, that first break. I think they went to Saudi Arabia. It was a team bonding exercise. As soon as they went back, they went on this amazing run, which obviously took them away from the relegation zone and all that. They've been back to this part of the world since. And again, I think it served them well. You know, it's good. It's a good break, weather-wise, as they keep mentioning it also. But, he focuses a lot on the team bonding, which in this case, there's no training or there's no practice matches, I think it's a good place to be. You get a little bit of alone time as well. You get, we know in Dubai, you get some great facilities for those who want to keep exercise. Probably they will exercise at just like a relaxed rate. But you get the facilities, you get great hotels and beach access or whatever, but you can be left alone as well. Get some, alone time. You won't be bothered by the media or anything. So, it's a nice break. I think the weather's perfect at the moment.
It is.
It's lovely weather. And if you've got that week break from international football, why not? It's like I said, it's served them really well in the past. Every time they've gone back from, they've had one of those team bonding. So they've gone back and they played really well, refreshed. So yeah, why not?
So it's a case of, hopefully it could kickstart what is going to be the run in now, isn't it? You're talking 10 or 11 games, so it's pivotal to him, isn't it?
It is, and I think that the last two results we were saying have been brilliant, and we expected them, sort of those two games. We focused on those games as ones to win, and there's the more difficult games coming up. So yeah, I think we're 11, 12 games left now. The run in really starts now.
Got to say, Bex, looking at the website and your biography, it's a fascinating read. It really is. So I sort of looked at my next question, and it's a question I've got to ask, and then I thought, well, if she is, and if she does answer yes, I don't know how or where she will find the time, but given all that you do, but are you invested in football, in the beautiful game? Are you a fan at all?
I was really into it as a kid, but I unfortunately had two older brothers who were not. You can never win against two people that are bigger than you. And so that kind of put me off a little bit. I have spates where I get really invested. So was it the 2010 World Cup? I got really invested in the Spanish team, mainly because they were all terribly good looking.
Love it.
And also did really well. And obviously, when the Lionesses won last year, and I kind of watched that, and I was like, oh my God, I finally properly get what all these blokes are on about. Like,
Absolutely.
amazing.
Well, I did have to ask because it's a fascinating bio that you've got. And listen, on a serious note, I did want to sort of turn my attention to your industry because your aim, and it's something that jumped out of all of the achievements and everything that you work on. This really jumped out to me. Your aim is to leave the industry in a better state for future disabled artists to access success in the business, but as well as making the arts business accessible to everyone. That's amazing, if not a huge undertaking. So can you give us a sort of a brief snippet of your blueprint of how you're going to make that work? Because I'm sure you will.
I wish that I had a blueprint because that would make it so much easier. I think so. I was involved in a car accident when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
And at the time, I really wanted to be an actor, and I basically went back to my college course at the time, which was a full-time kind of actor training thing, and got told by all of my tutors essentially, yeah, you should probably leave the industry. There isn't space for you now that you're disabled. And I remember I went to uni anyway and decided to study it anyway and all of that kind of thing. And I remember coming across a company called Grey Eye, who are a disabled company, and thinking, oh my God, if I'd have seen anything that they'd done when I was going through all of this, it might have made my journey a little bit easier, made it feel less lonely. And so I guess some of my blueprint is about staying here and being here and showing other people who might have some connection to some of the things that are me, that there is space for them here. And I think I probably bug my colleagues a lot because I'm always like, but what about this? Have you thought about that? But it's asking questions always and saying, is there a better way we can do this? Is there a way that we can include more people in this?
It comes over, I have to say, Bex, let me tell you now, because I've spent this week researching and looking, and it comes over whether you've been interviewed or you're interviewing yourself, because I know that you turn your hand to everything. So I'm going to stick with that, because I know there will be a blueprint in there, really, although you say not. I'm sure there will be in a mind that's as organised as yours. Ali, we said Ali before we were talking about this, and it is portrayed against that backdrop of '96. And you mentioned Manchester United, so it's pretty apt, isn't it, when the boys come back from this trip? They go head to head with the old enemy from the '90s, and especially that '96 season. It's Manchester United. So my question to you is this: it will look at on paper. It's a huge game, by the way, for Newcastle United to cement their position in the top four against Manchester United. It's also, in the fans' eyes, a revenge mission for that cup final defeat. But Eddie Howe will do everything in his power to play that down, won't he?
Yes, I don't think it should be a revenge match, even for the fans. But certainly not. Yeah, it shouldn't. I don't think it should. I think certainly I don't think the fans should look at it as a revenge mission, but certainly the players and the manager shouldn't. For one thing, in the cup final, I thought Newcastle, they were, like we said, they didn't let anyone down. They did their best. They just fell short. They were the second best team on the day. I don't think there should be any major regrets for that. So I don't think they didn't let anyone down. So I don't think that there should be thoughts of like, right, we need to make this up for the fans or anything. I don't think that's the case. I mean, there will be an element, of course, because it was so recent that we'd love to do. But I think just getting the 3 points, regardless of who it is against, it sounds like a cliche, but at this point, I don't think. In fact, playing it down would be the smart option. Just it's a home game. Newcastle are playing well. The fans will be really up for it. And maybe the fans, there'll be a bit of back and back forth between the two fans, but on the pitch, I think also because there'll be a few changes from the team that played at Wembley as well. Alexander Isak being the obvious one. He was the big miss, I think, at Wembley, and maybe should have played. So slightly different looking Newcastle. I think the cup finals, in the past now.
Staying on that note, with the playing side of it'll be a different Manchester United as well. They'll be missing Casemiro, I believe, who will start 4 games. He's come across a couple of red cards recently, and after a purple patch of playing really well for Manchester United. You just found the going a little tough of late.
Yeah, I mean, he's basically he's missed quite a few matches, and it's a four match ban for this one. And of course, he scored a lot of important goals. I mean, maybe he was brought in to steady the midfield and be more of a holding midfield player, but he has contributed to attack as well, and really been one of the best players. So I think it's a big plus for Newcastle that he's not playing. It's a really, really big plus, I think. And the dominance that United had at Wembley maybe can be overturned this time around.
Can't stress enough in the bigger picture of going for that top 4 place. What a massive game it is. So Bex, here we are. Here's a scenario for you. Here we are in 2023, not far from glory, with the team challenging and the fans having the feel-good factor, sounding familiar. If Eddie's boys taste success soon, can we expect a follow-up show called "Can't Believe We Did It"?
I mean, I think Rob would be very up for writing that. But I would say that we're probably slightly more pessimistic here at Live Theatre about Newcastle's chances on that one.
Realistic, not pessimistic.
Yeah. But so we do actually have another show coming up later this season called Jerry and Sewell, which is based on the season.
Yes.
And so 2 lads who are doing anything to try and get the money for a season ticket. So I think if fans are feeling a little bit disappointed maybe at the end of the season, that might be a good shout for them to cheer up a little bit and have a bit of fun.
Now, not just because you're on, so I'm not being biased, but that is probably, there's been quite a few productions of featuring the Northeast in the past, and I include Goal in that. Because that was one of the, but that season ticket, which if I'm not mistaken had a real Geordie name prior to it being called the season ticket as well. I think it was purely Belter, if I'm not mistaken. Just totally off script here. That was a real story that portrayed again something that must be close to you guys and how you view productions. It was, although it was the backdrop of Newcastle, and there was a human element to it. There was a great story of culture and growing up in a northern town, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's 2 lads from Gateshead facing all of the things most lads in Gateshead are struggling with, and I think for me, one of the things that I do love about like football fans in general is actually, I think one of the reasons I can't be a football fan is because I don't think I can deal with that level of emotion week in, week out. Like the highs and lows are just too big. So I'm like, actually, no, I'll keep that apart. So it's great to have, I love engaging with these stories where we follow that because the passion is just so infused in the bones of the people up here.
And for fans that want to, I mean, it's become such, I think maybe it's just me from the outside looking in now, but productions such as this and theatre now, I think are far more accessible, far more doable, far more obtainable for people to go and get involved in any types of production. So for people to stay in touch with you guys and what you do, where's the best way for us to sort of have a look online and follow you and see what's happening?
So you can follow the theatre on @Live Theatre on Twitter and Instagram, which has the latest offers and everything that we're up to. And there's also the website, which is, I think, www.live.org.uk. So don't hold me to that one. I'm suddenly doubting myself.
I've got to hear you're all right. Listen, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, and we really appreciate you taking the time. I know how busy it is. You're in the final throes of what's been a marvelous show, and you can gauge that as well by anyone if you just Google search the show. The amount of reviews, it's featured all over, which is tantamount to you and the team and what you do. So absolutely superb, and what a brilliant guest to have on as well, Bex. Really enjoyed having you on, Bex Bowsher. Listen, last word as always on the show goes to our very own Ali Khaled. And in a show where football is on an international break, Ali, I wanted to ask you about another passion of ours, F1, because I saw you all weekend reporting. You were where no one could get to. Tell us about the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix.
Yeah, it was a great 3 days in Jeddah on the Red Sea. It was fantastic. It was my first experience of the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Obviously, both you and I have covered or been to the Abu Dhabi one countless times, but it's the first time in Jeddah. It was a great experience. I think we got some great access to the drivers. I know I probably overshared some of the pictures, but it was great. We got some great interviews. We were in the paddock, so the paddock area with the where the media can go in and obviously interview the drivers and the team principals and so on. There's a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot, but a few celebrities as well. A few footballers were there. A few ex-footballers. I think a couple of people from connected to Newcastle as well. I think Merdad was there. Merdad Gudusino. Yeah. I think I was told he was there. So it was really, really nice. Good vibe to it. A really, really nice vibe to it. The race itself is at night as well, under the floodlights. So that's adds a bit of atmosphere. All in all, a really, really great experience. Genuinely enjoyed it. I mean, I love Formula One. We cover it not as much as football, but we cover it. Obviously. Quite extensively, and so it was brilliant to be there and experience it for the first time.
I whisper it quietly, but our very own backyard of Saudi Arabia is slowly taking over global and Middle East sport. It's the place to be, what with horse racing, F1, football, you name it, Ronaldo, we've got it all. Absolutely brilliant show. Another great episode to be on. Massive thanks to Bex Bowsher and continued success in everything you do. We'll see you next week on the next episode of Black and White with Arab News. How are the lads?